to the first round. Welcome to the first round of CDBG pre-application trainings. My name is Rosie Goldich, and I'm a CDBG coordinator for Community MT. Can everyone just put in the chat if you can hear me? I guess if you can't hear me, then you won't answer.
Right. and testing, Gus Byram, Alicia Alderman. Can you also hear us?
It looks like everybody can hear us.
Great. Okay. So first off, thanks for being here. First, we will have Gus Byram, our outreach specialist, and Alicia Alderman discuss our planning specialist discussing Criterion 1 planning. Then Jeanette Blythe and myself will present on Criterion 4 citizen participation. Please hold your questions until the end of each presentation or put them in the chat. We will have scheduled time for discussion and questions. Take the time now to make sure that you are muted. These presentations and slides will be made available online on our website shortly after the presentation. Now I'll hand it over to Gus and Alicia to get started.
All right. So again, I'm Gus Byram, outreach specialist, and I'll go first with the background. Of course, we want to welcome everyone for joining us, those here in Helena and those participating online. Again, this is an opportunity for us to go over in a series of presentations now, the key criteria for the Community Development Block Grant Program. I'm going to summarize especially the first part of Criterion 1, which is again looking at the general community planning needs assessment background of the local government. Now, so in this first one, this goes back to just to set the stage here a little bit. You see, of course, these principal points, and I'm going to go through them in just a moment. But to set the stage, this goes back to the Housing and Community Development Act of 1974, which was signed by President Ford, I believe, in the fall of 74. And one of the key requirements of the CDBG program, or Community Development Block Grant, is that local governments have extensive opportunities for the citizens to participate, but also to support a planning process. And that's an important element that's been carried forward, again, from HUD policies and from congressional action since 1974. A principal development in the evolution of the CDBG program then was after President Reagan was elected in 1980. During 81 and 82, Congress amended the program and set up the state CDBG, which of course then allows the states to administer the program for communities under 50,000 in population. But that requirement to have a recognition of the planning process and citizen participation has been carried forward and always has been a key element of the program, again, going back to 1974. So in my presentation, I'm just going to go through the critical points that you'll see in front of you that are taken from the guidelines, which are the basic overview statements and the principles. And then I will make some comments on each one, and then go through the specific criteria number 1 questions, particularly those that relate to the needs assessment process. And then I will turn it over to Alicia, and she will get into how the ranking process takes place and how scores are assigned by the individual members of the ranking team. So the first one talks about asking, of course, you as applicants to describe the adequacy and thoroughness of the planning process used by the applicant to identify overall community development and housing needs, particularly the needs of low and moderate income persons, and the activity or actions it plans to meet the identified needs. That language is taken almost verbatim out of the Housing and Community Development Act. So because one of the principal intents of the CDBG program was to make it flexible and very, very broad in scope. So as most of you know, CDBG can offer grants in regards to economic development, housing, public facilities, even services in some cases, particularly oriented around the needs of low and moderate income persons. So when an application is submitted to the CDBG program, as reviewers, here at the state, here in Helena, we are looking at the extent of your planning process and how does that relate to the application. And that's the theme, of course, all the way through. So then getting more specific, we'll look at the extent to which the particular project that you're proposing is consistent with your own community development objectives, as well as the national and state objectives of the CDBG program. And that refers to Appendix B. But the big and major objective is to assist low and moderate income populations. Right? But always, though, in that context of your overall community planning process and citizen engagement. Then we will also look at, again, has your application provided a reasonable rationale for selecting the proposed CDBG project over other community development and housing needs, and then the degree to which the applicant has considered the needs of low and moderate income and other special needs residents, like the seniors or any vulnerable population, homeless, single parent households, etc., and how the proposed project will benefit or impact those populations. So before we go to the next slide, I want to state that to support this, we have been involved, I would say, over 20 years with our technical assistance activities and grants for planning, and particularly grants for growth policies, to help you communities develop those plans and develop those citizen participation procedures. So we want to go to the next slide. So here's just an example of the downtown Thompson Falls master plan. It was assisted by the CDBG program. It's a good example of the planning and technical assistance that we've been offering, again, going on 2 decades, where we very, very much try to assist you local governments have the tools to carry out these planning processes, and particularly get that sense of community and vision and direction in terms of what are your overall community development needs. So to me, this is one of the most positive aspects of the CDBG program, because the more you tell us the story of what you're doing in regards to community development planning, of course, it's an opportunity to blow your own horn. And of course, the more you work on the community planning and you make your application, of course, more competitive, but you're also, of course, demonstrating to the Department of Commerce that you're doing good things in your town. And that's where the reward comes in the excitement, because you go out, you talk to the citizens, of course, and whether, like in the case of Thompson Falls, they wanted to undertake the revitalization of their downtown. That was a high priority that has been bubbling up for years and years and years in Thompson Falls, as well as addressing their water and wastewater system needs. But through the CDBG process, we're saying in the application, you describe what have you been doing in regards to community planning, and then very typically, and really getting into the nub of it, we're going to be looking for those critical planning documents and evidence of your citizen participation in community planning process. So of course, in Montana, that's going to be primarily your growth policy, which was modified in about 1999. The old comprehensive plan was changed from comprehensive plan to growth policy. And that is the document that pulls together the big picture vision, goals, objectives of your community in regards to infrastructure, housing, economic development, and other community needs. So like in the case then of Thompson Falls, they then again did this terrific downtown master plan. And I would say, of course, going forward, we would encourage that documents like this are not only intended, but they're actively discussed in the application and connected as reasonable to your proposal. Right, next slide. Okay, so this is just an example. And we would say, not only, I mean, don't put these documents in the appendices and just say, well, that's it. I mean, that's fine. But what we're looking for, of course, is the relationship of your project to these documents. And is there a discussion and a connection? So in this case, here's a conceptual drawing of streetscape improvements, showing how downtown Thompson Falls could look in regards to community revitalization. And having just talked to Thompson Falls this morning, that he indicated that there's projects underway right now to revitalize, I believe that's Highway 200, right there in Thompson Falls. Good, but this is the critical elements of the community story and the community planning process that we are hoping to see addressed in Criterion 1. So go to the next slide. Okay, so we'll ask whether the applicant is developed and uses its planning documents as a springboard for action in its community. So just to tell you, when that application comes in, yes, we're going to be looking for a current growth policy, obviously a growth policy that was prepared in 2020 or 2021. It's going to show that it's current and relevant, as opposed to a growth policy that was maybe completed in 2005. We're also going to be looking for supporting documents, and I'll talk more about this, but particularly the capital improvements plan, especially if you have an infrastructure application or housing plans, if you're concentrating on housing needs, or even economic development, if you're coming in for an economic development proposal. Then, and then under criteria 4, and that will be discussed later, we will be looking at the extent to which local citizens have participated in the preparation of plans for the future development of the community. In other words, again, community buy-in, preparation of the community growth policy, is it relevant, and similar plans addressing community development and revitalization needs. So just to go further, we're looking for communities that not only have a vibrant and ongoing community planning process that includes a fairly current growth policy and hopefully a fairly current and adopted capital improvements plan, but then is the community actually moving forward with supporting evidence to show that you're implementing those documents. Particularly as those needs relate back to needs that were articulated by the general community. So the big issue has been like infrastructure deficiencies, that particularly where we've been active with ARPA, during the last 2 years, the American Recovery Plan Act, we would expect to see discussion in regards to how those infrastructure needs relate to your community's capital improvement plan and your growth policy. So we'll, excuse me, and we also put in a note here at the bottom that says an adopted CIP is not a prerequisite. In other words, it's not a threshold requirement, but certainly if you can demonstrate that your community does maintain a strong capital improvement plan, that's going to be competitive. That demonstrates the soundness and the seriousness of the community's intent to actually implement infrastructure improvements for the next 5, 6, 7 years. So next slide. Okay. So these are the basic questions that echo or come, of course, reflect right off the principles that I was just talking about. So we will be looking for documentation that describes the efforts that you've made to engage residents or otherwise engage, encourage citizen participation in the development of the growth policy or other planning efforts. So yes, you can meet the bare minimum. You can run, 2 ads as a newspaper, you hold the hearing, but of course, we're going to be looking for extraordinary efforts where you went down into the neighborhood, or you met in the schools, or you went to the senior centers, or you had other efforts to engage the citizens at the grassroots level in this community visioning and process and identification of goals and objectives. Then we're looking for language that demonstrates that the proposed project is reasonable and appropriate given long-term demographic trends reflected by current and appropriate census estimates. For instance, or for example, population increases or decreases, growth in unincorporated areas, increases in elderly population, etc. So we're very aware that many of our Montana communities right now are facing extraordinary growth challenges. And so we're going to be looking to see, all right, does the community growth policy identify areas where new growth is going to be incorporated? Do you have a plan to where you're going to put in the infrastructure? Also, do you have areas where you've identified that are not necessarily appropriate for new growth and development, such as floodplains or wildlife corridors or areas of that nature? So this is your opportunity to demonstrate to the Department of Commerce in this criterion that you have a proactive plan in regards to your growth pressures. Okay, next one. Okay, so this is another example. I'd like to talk about White Sulphur Springs. Now, this is a case where, of course, they're faced with the possible development of the copper mine there north of White Sulphur. And the community has been quite engaged, I would say, the last 4 or 5 years, working closely with the county and, of course, with the mining company in this case. But they are really polishing. Of course, they developed this growth policy together with the city and county working together. It was a fairly recent, just adopted here. You could see February 2021. And they are actively planning where are they going to be accommodating new households? How are they going to accommodate new anticipated employment? Where are they going to put the infrastructure? And again, how are you going to handle these surges in population? And to a greater extent, this is what's going on right now today, of course, in the Bozeman area and Kalispell and other parts of Western Montana. And this is the kind of process that we feel demonstrates that the community is very proactively assessing its community development needs and coming up with appropriate plans. Okay, next. So again, another picture. I recently went over and met with the city council at White Sulphur Springs, and this is the kind of thing that we're looking at in the application. So for instance, an application, say, coming in from White Sulphur Springs would show, all right, this is our community right now. You can see the wastewater treatment plant, the lagoons there to the southwest of town, areas owned by the state. But then you would have supporting narrative saying, okay, here's where we plan to accommodate future growth and developments, like say, particularly southwest of town or to the northeast or the eastern part of the community, and then tie that in with your community's overall goals, objectives, your overall planning process. And that means you have held community meetings. You have a good grassroots sense of where the community wants to grow or not to grow in some areas. And then you've inventoried what your community development assets are right now. What are your future needs? And then what are your specific plans? And we're going to be looking for, if it's a high growth community, we're going to be asking, do you have a strategy in regards to affordable housing, as well as infrastructure, given the ARPA bill and the new infrastructure bill that was passed by Congress as well as economic development in handling the impacts of anticipated growth and development. Okay, next slide. All right, so we in these the final slides here in regards to the sections that I'm discussing, it just again it just fine tunes the points that I have been emphasizing. So we're going to be looking for comprehensive plans for community resilience, and resiliency is a big word right now, and it's an important factor in regards to like potential disasters. We're dealing with 7 counties that were affected by the flooding last year, and trying to give those communities the tools to bounce back, for instance, from the adverse effects of those flooding impacts. But also asking the community, what are you doing in terms of affordable housing issues? What's your plan for investment in public works? Are you making a reasonable local contribution, for instance, to leverage your ARPA funds or plans to leverage the upcoming infrastructure bill monies, or accessing the Montana Coal Endowment Program in addition to CDBG? Then also, what's your basic plan for maintaining jobs for, of course, everyone in the community, and protecting critical environment as well, like areas of high environmental values? So we're also going to be asking about, have you at least participated in the past, or are you currently involved in rehabilitation of existing housing units, particularly for persons with disabilities and the elderly, because focusing on the needs of low and moderate income people has always been a high priority of the Housing and Community Development Act, and that ties right in with rehabilitation of homes. And then in regards to public facility projects, the big message there is always to ask, what are your highest priorities? And then, of course, particularly, where are you at in terms of preparing preliminary engineering reports that support the need for, let's say, expanded water, wastewater facilities? And then in regards to community facility projects, these are under CDBG now, these are projects other than water and wastewater. So community facilities would be like food banks, nursing homes, senior centers, and projects of that nature that particularly serve low and moderate income people. And then are your plans to improve those community facilities coordinated with efforts like sidewalks, trying to encourage walkable neighborhoods, trying to provide public transportation, and then trying to locate these community facilities, say in proximity to affordable housing or grocery stores or doctor's offices, etc., where people that use these facilities have reasonable access with a minimum amount of transportation to where they live. Okay, so and then as I wrap up here, in regards to public facility projects, we're also looking in regards to your financial plan. So that means asking the question, this is your chance to tell us, what have you done in terms of raising local taxes, like in your property taxes? What's your proposed user charge in the case of a water and sewer project? Are you going to be imposing hookup charges for people to hook up water and sewer? Do you have an impact fee program? Because some communities have that in terms of extraordinary development proposals. And then especially, what's the status of your other matching funds? So whether it's federal, like SRF funds, or other EPA monies, or USDA rural development, state funds, again, like the DNRC, as well as of course CDBG, your local funds, and then your local buddies that you're contributing to the project as well. And then finally, on point number 5, we asked, is the project located in an opportunity zone? And that was a recent amendment to a Treasury Act program that does provide tax incentives for people that are looking for special investments in areas where they can get certain tax breaks by making investment. And I believe about one of approximately 25 zones have been identified across Montana. And that information is on our website. All right, so wrapping up here, this is just another example of another community. This is Eureka, where they have been quite successful accessing CDBG and the Montana Coal Endowment Program, engaging the citizens over, I would say, at least a 10-year effort to eventually extend water and sewer services to the Midville area north of Eureka. That area has now been annexed, and they're continuing the process of hooking those people up to city sewer, getting them off septic tanks, because of course they were starting to get problems with contamination of their wells. And so the city has been proactive in terms of accessing in CDBG as well as other programs to extend the infrastructure north to bring in the Midville area. And it's a good example where how the community came to the Department of Commerce, they got the planning grant. They're finishing up this growth policy actually right now, undertook the community planning process, very strong needs assessment effort, and they have demonstrated how they are, particularly wrestling with infrastructure plans to go forward to serve the Midville area, as well as dealing with all the potential growth areas or all the potential growth issues that you see falling, within that general dash blue line around the town of Eureka, because those are areas that very likely will be facing similar issues that are possible areas for annexation, say during the next 10 to 20 years. Again, this is what Eureka did. And we would say, finally, tell the story as you address this criterion. Yes, it's fine to include the planning document and append that to the application, but we're looking for the active discussion and connection between the local citizen needs effort and citizen participation and these planning documents right there in the discussion of responding to the criteria. Okay, and then yes, this at the end here, I also wanted to mention that we have considerable resources with our Census Economic and Information Center. And this just shows that the census geography there at Eureka, where they have we have census data, of course, for the town of Eureka as well. But then if you look to the north, you have what we call a census designated place right there at Midvale. And so also extensive census information, socioeconomic, median household income, poverty data, low and moderate income data is available for these census areas as well. So as you're working on this needs assessment process, feel free to reach out to us. We can provide that information to you, which can be an invaluable part of your one of your tools to prepare these community plans. Okay. And now I'm going to turn it over to Alicia, and you're going to talk about how we actually do the scoring.
Great, thanks, Gus. Hi, everyone. My name is Alicia Ollerman. I'm the planning specialist at the Department of Commerce. I'm going to walk you through the scoring level definitions and examples. So we'll start with the highest level, level 5. And you must provide a very complete narration that thoroughly addresses the overall criteria, applicable questions, and meets minimum requirements, including a very complete substantive supporting documentation to support its claims. So you must also demonstrate alignment with national and state objectives. And the responses are considered exemplary, particularly innovative, or are extremely consistent with the intent of the ranking criterion. And there are no deficiencies of any significance. So this is the top level you can receive. A good example, so you would have many current planning documents. That's important. In this level, you need to have very up-to-date planning documents appropriate to your size and type of local government. So if you're a small city versus a very populated county, we would take that into consideration as well. And the examples of the main planning documents, as Gus mentioned, are the CIPs and growth policies. And those need to be adopted through public processes with evidence of citizen participation and provide evidence that it utilizes its planning documents to prioritize public or community facility construction projects. The key here is that the review committee needs to see the clear connection between long-range planning and the proposed project. In other words, if your community is keeping planning documents up to date, using them to help prioritize and plan your community, and keeping members of your community involved throughout the planning and implementation process, you could possibly receive a 5 in this area. The amount of current planning documents, as I mentioned before, depends on the size of the community. Again, we don't expect a small town to have the same amount of planning documents as, say, a larger county that's booming in growth. And the main point here, and for all of these really, is that you are using your planning documents as living documents. So they're, as Gus mentioned, acting as a springboard to direct your focus to a certain planning activity. Okay, next. So here's an example of a recent growth policy that we did through the CDBG planning program. And this was for Rebo County, and they, like I said, they just recently completed this. And so they are my community example for a level 5. So they received, this is for a different project, by the way, not that growth policy. This is to renovate the senior center and food bank. And they received a level 5 in this area. And the rationale was that applicant demonstrates a history of and commitment to long-range planning and successfully uses its planning processes to move from identifying goals and objectives and assessing needs to budgeting for and prioritizing capital improvements that exceeds that of other applicants of similar population size and capacity. And that's another important point, is that we also do look into your capacity. More to come on that later. And planning documents include an up-to-date growth policy, an up-to-date comprehensive CIP that is reviewed and updated on a regular schedule. Again, having it being a living document. Participation in a SEDS with the Regional Economic Development Corporation, a community needs assessment, and other planning documents. The proposed project is aligned with and mentioned in both the growth policy and CIP. So that's kind of to give you an idea of what we are looking at to give you that the level 5. To receive a level 4, you must provide a solid narration addressing the overall criterion, applicable questions, and it must meet the minimum requirements with strong documentation. So an example for a level 4, this is, so applicant has a current CIP or the most relevant planning document related to planning for the construction of public or community facilities appropriate to its size and type. Example can be in some cases a PER is acceptable for this document. And but other relevant and appropriate planning documents may be missing or out of date. The CIP may be in need of an update, but the applicant provides evidence of using its CIP to plan for, prioritize capital improvements, including the proposed project, and robust public participation. The key here is that the applicant demonstrates that it engages in long-range planning, including robust public participation, and the proposed project is directly connected to its planning efforts, but still has some room to improve in its planning. In other words, if you have a current CIP and use it actively to prioritize projects in your community, but other planning documents are out of date, you may receive a 4. Also, if your CIP is slightly older, but you still use it to prioritize and you have a few other up-to-date planning documents, you could still possibly receive a 4. This level indicates that your community has strong planning, but there are still areas to improve. Okay, to receive a level 3. So this one is to, the applicant must provide an adequate narrative addressing the overall criterion. So the example for this one, applicant has planning documents relevant to planning for the construction of community and or public facilities appropriate to its size and type. Example here is a CIP, in some cases a PER, and in some cases a growth policy. And dependent on, again, the size of your community, etc. And provides evidence of using its relevant planning documents to prioritize the proposed project, but the relevant planning documents are in need of an update. Or the applicant provides a logical but vague connection of the proposed project to relevant planning documents, or the project is not included in the relevant planning documents, but the committee, the committee deems that it is logical, reasonable improvement that is aligned with the goals and objectives of the relevant planning documents. And also the committee will consider if planning documents are in the process of being created or updated, we do take that into consideration. The key here is that the community may not have current planning documents, but it's doing its best to engage in long-range planning, to inform its capital improvements decision-making, and is committed to improving. In other words, if you are using more outdated planning documents, maybe have one or two updated, or are working towards updating important planning documents such as the CIP, PER, and growth policy, and you are using what you have to prioritize projects, you could receive a 3. We definitely take into account again, if you are updating the planning documents that you need, that just shows us that you're committed to the long range planning of your community. Okay, another community example for level 3. Hamilton recently completed a growth policy through our CDBG planning program, and they did a great job. It's fantastic. Next slide. Again, not related to that project. This was for a fire station new building, and they received a level 3 for this. And as you can see, they had quite a few planning documents listed at the bottom, and some are a little outdated, some are newer. And so it's kind of a balance. So that's why they received kind of the middle score in that area. And the applicant rationale for why they received the level 3 was the applicant has a CIP from 2012, which does not include fire services. The applicant included information from a national study that states the existing Hamilton Fire Hall has all 3 of these substandard unsafe features. I won't read those all out right now. The applicant has a growth policy from 2015, and they were updating their growth policy at the time, which I just showed you the Envision Hamilton. And let's see. Although the city's 2015 growth policy update briefly discusses LMI citizens, the local planning efforts could be enhanced by including an assessment of the needs of the LMI population, along with objectives, goals, and strategies to implement improvements, in addition to developing a comprehensive capital improvements plan that includes fire and police services. All right, level 2. So in this one, the applicant provides some narration addressing the overall criterion. For example, the applicant has relevant planning documents appropriate to its size and type, but they are severely out of date or do not directly or only loosely support the proposed community or public facility construction project. The review committee finds the proposed project logical and reasonable in light of evidence of long-range planning provided by the applicant. But the applicant has much work to do to improve its long-range planning so that it is effectively used to identify, prioritize, budget for, and complete necessary capital improvements. In other words, you have the planning documents needed, but they are definitely outdated, and the community is not working on updating old planning documents. They support your proposed project, but in a vague, unclear way. And it basically just means that your community has some work to do to get planning documents updated so that you can plan, prioritize, and budget. And we have a level 1. And this one is application has serious weaknesses in its narrative responses to the ranking criterion. And an example, applicant has relevant planning documents appropriate to its size, but they are out of date. Applicant does not demonstrate using its planning documents to identify, prioritize, budget for capital improvements. The committee deems that the proposed project is logical and reasonably supported by the spirit of the out-of-date planning documents, but not included in planning documents. The key here is that the community is not currently making effective use of long-range planning to inform its capital improvements decisions. Okay. Oh, sorry. And a level 0. On the same slide. This is if you fail to provide a response of any kind. So this is the bottom level you can receive. I haven't seen many zeros, to be honest. And again, you have the necessary planning documents, but they're outdated and need to be updated. And your updated planning documents are no longer being used to prioritize projects. And the project you are applying for is not supported by these documents. The community is not using planning documents to budget for projects or inform its capital improvement decisions. And those are the considerations we make when we are reviewing the applications and assigning the levels.
So we have reached the end of the Criterion 1 presentation, and now we would like to open up the floor for questions that you have. So feel free to put the questions in the chat. We do have someone here who does have a question. Do you want to introduce yourself and what your question is?
Sure. Lynette Diaz, Great West Engineering. And my question, I always have this question about districts. So districts, I know that hopefully the county is doing it, in their growth policy, they're including districts, but they typically do include, a small paragraph of the district and what the needs are based on like older PERs. But the districts themselves don't do growth policies. And they often don't do CIPs because they're managing one or two systems. And so within that PERs, we talk about O&M and what that operating budget is and what they need to do for that. And we calculate that into their user rates. Are they scored differently? Are they kind of scored against other districts in that case? Because they're not going to have a lot of those other items.
Well, I can talk about how they're scored, and then Gus, do you want to talk about the documents
Yeah,
themselves?
Lisa and I are today.
Okay. So when we do, this is specifically for public and community facilities,
Correct.
and all of the applications that we receive during that round are scored against each other. So that means that water and sewer districts are going against cities, towns, and counties. We do not separate out the districts.
So do they get
But-
less? So they get less points then because they're not going to have those things
No.
necessarily. Okay.
So, Gus, do you want to?
No, and it's an excellent question. A key point, and it's really a very, very good question, because a key point that we did not cover here this afternoon is that in the CDBG program, when Congress set it up, as opposed to our Montana Coal Endowment Program, a water and sewer district cannot apply directly. See, so Congress said in terms of CDBG, the applicant has to be the general purpose local government. So in the case of our county water and sewer districts, which of course are located in the outlying unincorporated areas, the county has to be the applicant. So when the application comes in, let's say it's for water and sewer, we're still going to look very, very much at the planning process of the applicant. So the primary applicant is going to be, say, in Cascade County or Flathead County or Gallatin County. And we're going to be looking at, was there a growth policy again for the county, a CIP for the county, and then of course in regards to the district, yes, is there a sound, complete, a current PER for that district? And certainly in any district that wants to demonstrate that it's actively engaged not only in that immediate water and wastewater issue, but perhaps other issues that are going on in the community. I mean, that's frosting on the cake. So I mean, there's no prohibition against the water and sewer district talking about how they really are a forum for the community addressing other needs as well. Because some of our little towns, if they're of course they're unincorporated like Basin, the district almost acts as the city council, for the community. And if you can tell that story too, that further strengthens the application. So Lynette, your question is excellent, but we still try to be completely fair in terms of district county applications versus incorporated city applications, and try to the extent that we can look at all of them and place all of them on a level playing field.
So I think it is important to say when a county or city is updating their growth policy, if they know that renovations to the water and sewer district need to be made, and they are going to be applying for a public facilities grant, to make sure that that is in the growth policy.
Yeah.
So that we can point back to those stated needs.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, Rosie, that a proactive county growth policy is definitely going to be discussing the needs of their districts and their sub areas.
And again, we also take into account the size of the community. So that would be taken into account also.
Thank you. I don't forget that they have to be sponsored. I just always think on the level of the issues at the district, so. Yeah. get it.
Yes, we do. And also to add to Gus's point, we do consider a unit of local government to be a city, town, or county.
Yeah.
Period.
Yeah, for CDBG.
For CDBG.
Yeah.
Any other questions in the chat, or does anyone want to unmute themselves? Okay. It sounds like having updated recent planning documents is really important. What is considered out of date? For example, would a plan from 2020 be considered outdated? What about 2021 or 2022? Is there a specified timeline that is acceptable for planning documents, or does it depend on the specific project? Gus and Alicia, you can start that one out.
Okay, again, maybe I'll take that first. Again, to me, it depends. It's not a rigid black and white answer. It depends upon the community. For instance, if there's a community that's engaged or experiencing current very, very heavy growth, and the growth policy is 5 years old and it's reflecting the situation, or maybe you were, say, in 2018 or 2017, that to me would weaken the application. Okay. So whereas in another community that they're not experiencing any growth and development, they're actually losing population, they haven't done a growth policy for 4 years, it might be unfair to penalize them because there are no major development issues and things are pretty stable. So, but overall, we try to give more points and more recognition though on more current processes. I mean, Jeanette, any comments or?
Yeah, I would just say, as a reminder, Rosie mentioned this earlier too, and just that it really does, you really are in the pool of the other applicants and you're being compared to other applicants, and we do try to do more matching up of apples to apples so that you're kind of grouped, the expectations, you'll be grouped with similar types of communities and what they're doing. So if there's no science to it, we try to make it as systematic as we can, but it really will be a qualitative analysis. And like Gus just described, it's you'll do the best you can, and then you will be compared against what other communities are doing who are of similar size and capacity.
Yeah, a good example is like capital improvement plans. I mean, we get capital improvement plans that are 8, 9 years old. And obviously those just are not current. They're not reflective of current developments with like ARPA and other infrastructure programs, and versus a community that is very proactive and their capital improvement plan is very aware and brings out the point that the community is actively seeking ARPA assistance and is engaged in the current federal programs and has a long-range plan.
Thank you for that question.
I have one other comment I just wanted to make, and that is about the documentation that's submitted. I don't recall if Alicia mentioned or if you guys mentioned that, not that actually attaching the documentation. I know this is in the language of the application guidelines to request that you attach each of the documents that you're referring to and wanting to cite as documentation of your planning efforts rather than referencing them and sort of, saying they're out there in, cyber land. And so, that's I don't know if Alicia you or Gus, you wanna speak to that at all, of sort of like that, how you would look at communities that maybe reference versus like, are they counted at all, or if they're just, they have to be attached in order to be counted? If that's at all a concern.
I haven't seen that be a problem in the past.
Okay.
If it's referenced, is it easily referenced? And of course, because what we're looking at is, do you actively discuss though the relevance of the planning document to your current proposal?
Right, and is it attached to your application?
Yeah,
So we can go look at it and see. Yeah.
Or if it's referenced and it has a link to your website that has the document right there. I think that's acceptable.
we'd accept it.
Okay.
Any additional questions? Hearing and seeing none, we are going to pause for a 5-minute break before we start Criterion 4. So seeing the time right now, it is 2:21. Yeah, so we'll come back in approximately 5 minutes to continue the presentation. Thank you.